one of my favorite stories actually is there was a woman in our group and she had 16 years prior had a child that she hadn't wanted, but she had gone through given the child the basic care. Her daughter made sure she went to school and was fed, but just really had struggled with this unwanted pregnancy for years and didn't feel a lot of warmth and affection towards her daughter. Her daughter was now 16 and just would reach out to her mom and she'd just be cold and clam up. And so in the group, they talked about that dynamic. And one of the reasons I really love interpersonal therapy is because it's very practical and it's very, you can sense it. So one of the things we'll do often is what's called a role play. Basically, it's a space to practice. And so the facilitator guided her with her fellow groupmates or fellow participants in a series of activities where first someone else would act out how she would treat her daughter. She was able to see that from a third party perspective. And then different practices, she was able to practice a different group member and seal that. And then they reversed it. They had somebody act as the mom who was cold and unwilling to give her daughter an affection. And she acted as her own daughter. And it was just provided that kind of breakthrough space for her to be able to feel and really be able to put herself in her daughter's shoes. And then a couple weeks later, she did. She came back and she's, no, for the first time, I was able to give my daughter a real hug. And it's a small story, it's a small breakthrough, but in the life of that family, it's transformational.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Christianity Integrated podcast, a channel which helps you integrate Christian wisdom into your everyday life. And today we're joined by Joy Bittner, the founder of Vida Plena, an organization which helps to bring strong mental health in Latin America. Hi, Joy. What is Vida Plena, and do you want to explain what the meaning of this is?
Yeah, great. It's great to meet everybody. And I really just thank you for having me here this morning. And so, yes, Planet, in short, we exist because of the problem of mental health, OSAD specifically, is people who are suffering from depression, anxiety here in Ecuador. And because of their geography, because of their economic circumstances, are not able to get the help that they want and the help they need and the help that they deserve. And so what Vida Plena does is we exist to be able to bridge that gap between people who are struggling and it's affecting their lives, their families, their communities, and the fact that there are evidence-based treatments out there to be able to help them. So specifically, Vida Plena is Spanish for abundant life or flourishing life. And it really comes very directly from when Jesus says, I have come to give you life and life that is abundant, life that is overflowing. And that actually is the end goal. I joke with the team, we are the Stop Depression Foundation. It's much more than that. It's really about letting people have the opportunity to not be held back by their mental health struggles, but to be able to flourish, to be able to be fully present for their families, to be able to live a life that feels meaningful, purposeful, to be able to pursue things that matter to them. And many of us in the US, even though I've been living here in Ecuador for going on 14 years, there are some access. We have tools, there are support systems. It's not perfect, very broken, of course. I recognize that. But for someone in a marginalized lower income community in Ecuador, it's nothing. Their options are literally nothing. And we want for those people to be able to have the same opportunities to be able to live that life that is flourishing. And so that's why we exist.
Thank you for the introduction. And do you mind explaining a bit further about the four-step community-based approach and also why you decided for the community-based approach compared to more of a one-on-one therapy style?
Yeah. So specifically, what we do at Vida Planet is the broad strokes is that it's making sure that people have an opportunity to live a life that's flourishing. But the way we do that is somewhat unique. We train local community members to be able to be group facilitators. So what we offer is a group therapy, and that's very intentional. It's intentional because in Latin America, the culture is very personal focused. It's very about relationships and how you connect with other people. And I see that's a thing in Latin America. Even so, I think in many cultures around the world, that's important. And then to borrow a phrase from Alcoholics Anonymous, we get sick, we get sick in community and we heal in community. What they mean by that is, even though I think often we think of like mental health and like anxiety and depression as being like, this is something in me, in my head, and something that I struggle with, it didn't come often from nowhere. It comes as part of the broader context and our family systems and kind of the habits and patterns and the context of what you're living in. And so working through that with other people is really important. And so it would be, it's it's a space for people to come together. Specifically, our groups are 6 to 8 people, and what we do is we bring them together with a facilitator who helps guide the conversation and make sure that people are able to feel safe, be able to share the problems that they're struggling with, and then guides them through a series of tools to be able to do that. And then, so very specifically, we use what is called group interpersonal therapy. And the reason we use group interpersonal therapy is because it is one of the top recommendations, specifically by the World Health Organization. It has more than 25 years of published studies demonstrating its effectiveness. And we've also seen that in our own groups, specifically people who join one of our groups by the end of the 8 weeks, they either have mild to no depression. And not, I don't just say that rightly because we have the numbers to back it up. We track every single person, their symptoms every single week. And if they're struggling with depression and or anxiety, 84% of people finish the group with mild to no depression, anxiety. Of course, that's not perfect. There are still people who need extra help, and then we work to try to connect them with some sort of other service and there's private care. But what we are able to demonstrate is that this is a and so yeah, so what are we doing? So first, we train local community members to be able to guide these groups. We train them in the model, and then we give them ongoing support, ongoing education. Is that just a one-time training and forever? But so we train local community members to be like facilitators. We do a lot of outreach. There's a lot of stigma still around mental health, I think, universally, but even more so here, there's a sense of you don't go talk to somebody until you're done, until you're like really quite crazy, you're bad. So it's working with people to do earlier interventions and that it's not just for crazy people. So we do a lot of outreach. And then we actually run the groups. Like I mentioned, the groups run for 8 weeks, and then we have an intake session before that. That's the specific structure. And the groups meet, we meet in person and online. So when we meet in person, we're meeting in local churches, community centers, the spaces and places where people are already existing. And then we actually do meet online. In Latin America, during the pandemic, there was a lot of online classes. And so people are more familiar with that modality. And so do have that option as well. And interestingly, we've seen that like the online groups are almost as effective. So that's like kind of we like to offer that because sometimes due to geography and like people being quite dispersed, it's hard for them to get to the actual location. And so we have that. And then the fourth piece is we do ongoing follow up. And so that's really important for us. It would be complete failure in my mind if somebody joined a group, they went through the process, and like they were feeling better at the end of the weeks. As soon as the group ended, 2, 3 weeks later, they're back to where they started. And that would just feel like an overall failure. And so what we do is we follow up with people 3 months later and then 6 months later. So that way we can be sure of what the outcomes are. And what we have seen is that people we follow up with 6 months later basically it maintains. So the benefits that they see, the gains basically hold steady for where we're at. And so that's really encouraging to me because it means that people's lives are actually being changed beyond that. And so it's one of those things that feels really important to me.
Brilliant. And you just said at the end about how it's important to you. Is there a particular reason why you decided to go into mental health in particular?
Yeah. I so I studied psychology as an undergrad and then in a master's in social work. That said, I didn't go down that route. So just kind of sharing a little bit of my personal story. So in my social work program, there was an opportunity to study to go become a clinical social worker, which in the US means you're a therapist, patients. And during my first year practicum, I was quite under from and just quit. And I was really overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by just people's life stories and the idea of having a full case. So I went what was considered to be administrative route is how they talk about it. And then worked for the next 10 years or so, not even longer, about 15 years, doing social service projects and like a lot of different development projects, community development projects, but never as a therapist. And where this came from, so then I was living in Ecuador. I'd been living in Ecuador for quite some time at this point, over 10 years. And I was running a fair trade company. Specifically, what we did is we worked with women, indigenous women who made jewelry. We sold museum shops, John Lewis in the UK, a number of other places. And the goal was to be able to help these women have a fair living and good income to be able to support their families. And we did that. Something that kept coming up to me was that money alone doesn't fix problems. Specifically, there was one woman who was part of the program, and she unfortunately lost her husband to suicide. And I had enough of a mental health background to realize, okay, this is her and her kids are going to need extra help to process this and get through it. And as much as I tried, I wasn't able to find a psychologist for her. And despite the fact that she was working a decent job, I continued to see her family struggle and spiral. And I felt like I had failed. I felt like I'd failed her. And I look back and in some ways I had failed her. And so that's where some of these, like seeing these sort of scenarios come out over and over again was the impetus for it. And then I was starting to think about, okay, what was going to be like next in my life and looking for ideas and God works in mysterious ways. And in my case, it was through a Facebook post. Specifically, I saw a Facebook post about a really incredible organization out of Zimbabwe called the Friendship Bench. And what they were doing, they were training grandmothers to be able to provide a very time limited therapy to people. And what thing that really stood out to me about their program was they had dozens of academic papers, research studies done by people from the US, from the UK, demonstrating the effectiveness of their model. And having worked in a lot of different development projects over the years, I'd become frustrated by these projects that were based on good intentions, but really there's no, really, it was good intentions. We just didn't know. They just didn't know what was the impact. And so I was really struck by the evidence base of that and just fell in love with that program. And then a similar program, Strong Minds out of Uganda, which has also larger amounts of evidence behind what they're doing. And just became very convinced that there's no one else doing this here in Latin America. And so then it was like, okay, like this model, this sort of community focused, they'd call it in professional terms, like lay provided mental health. Like we needed to be doing this in Latin America as well. And so that's where the idea for Vida Plena was born. It is, and so I myself went through, so we partnered with Columbia University. They developed the original manual. So like I mentioned, we use group interpersonal therapy. This is an open source manual. Anyone can download it off of the World Health website. But what we're doing is we are adapting it and then implementing it at scale here in Ecuador with ambitions to be able to reach the wider region. And so to do that, so we initially partnered with the team at Columbia University, the Global Mental Health Lab. They provided us the initial training. I went through the training myself, supervision to be able to implement correctly, and they continue to support us over the long term. And it's it's been a beautiful journey. So we just finishing now our third full year. And just to kind of give like a small story of example, the type of transformations that we'll see is really one of my like favorite stories actually. Is there was a woman in our group and she had 16 years prior had a child that she hadn't wanted, but she had gone through given the child the basic care. Her daughter, she went to school and was fed, but just really had struggled with this unwanted pregnancy for years and didn't feel a lot of like warmth and affection towards her daughter. Her daughter was like now 16 and just like, would reach out to her mom and she'd just be cold and clam up. And so in the group, they talked about that dynamic. And one of the reasons I really love interpersonal therapy is because it's very practical and It's very, you can sense it. So one of the things we'll do often is what's called like a role play. Basically, it's like a space to practice. And so the facilitator guided her with her fellow groupmates or fellow participants in a series of activities where like first like someone else would act out like how she would treat her daughter. She was able to see that from a third party perspective. And then different practices, she was able to practice like a different group work and like seal that. And then they reversed it. They had somebody act as like the mom who was like cold and like unwilling to give her daughter an affection, and she acted as her own daughter. And it was just provided that kind of like breakthrough space for her to be able to feel and really be able to put herself in her daughter's shoes. And then a couple weeks later, she did. She came back and she's no, for the first time, I was able to give my daughter like a real hug. And it's a small story, it's a small breakthrough, but in the life of that family, it's transformational. It's transformational to be able to rebuild those relationships that were broken. And so often that is what we're doing. That is the goal of what we're doing. Yeah, kind of give like a wider background. And I don't know, I'd love to hear, do you have any interest specifically in mental health and kind of some of the, how does this kind of the kind of topic come through?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. That's like really beautiful to hear, and I'm glad that you spoke about it further. I guess for me, I think that it's something that I haven't necessarily personally experienced a lot. However, I do know that it can be hard to really explain the way that you feel. And sometimes, especially for me, like as a guy, it's hard to sort of know what to say or what to think. So I'm just really interested in exploring different ways to be able to help myself, but also help other people be able to have those experiences and know that it's okay to not be okay, if you like, no matter what circumstances are and things like that. So yeah, I think it's just really interesting hearing it from your perspective, and also something that isn't as common in the sense of the more community-based approach compared to the one-on-one therapy, which is why I asked you about that. So I'm really glad you shared it.
Yeah. I think you hit on something that's really common is that people either it's recognizing it yourself, but I think everyone's lives have been touched. I'm certain that there's people that you know in your friends and family and circles that have been affected by depression, have been affected by anxiety. And sometimes it's like learning to be able to recognize those signs and how to help people and step in. And you also hit on another really important topic that often mental health for men is far more neglected. I don't know. It turns out my like male friends and people in my life tell me men have emotions too. And it turns out, but it's working, helping men is like creating that set others kind of sets of safe space for men to be able to talk that through and really be able to express that. And it could be with a therapist. It doesn't have to be. But it's even just like part of like why, like you mentioned, the group therapy model is not just helping people to build that one-on-one relationship with their therapist, which of course is important, but we also encourage people within the group to be in touch throughout the week and to stay in touch after. We set up WhatsApp groups to be able to help that happen. And the reason for that is kind of like a random Tuesday. It's not quite appropriate for you to call your therapist and be like, I'm having a bad week. Could we just chat for a bit? But you could call your friend in the group, this other person who you build a rapport with over weeks of sharing each other's, listening to each other's stories. It is totally appropriate to reach out to them and be able to say, "Hey, is anyone available?" And more often than not, what we've seen is that yes, somebody will be like, "Yeah, give me a call. I'm like happy to chat." And it's really building that sense of community. Because I think that is like often what's breaking down is like that sense of, is there someone who will support me through this, be there for me? And Ecuador, Latin America, despite being a collectivist society and having more of sort of like strong families, there's still a lot of brokenness. There's still a lot of people who, for some reason, various reasons, are disconnected from their families. Their family isn't a safe place, especially the case of people who are migrants, who are refugees coming from mostly Venezuela, Colombia in our case. They've lost those connections. And I think that's the type of thing that a lot of people have experienced. They've moved for some, they've moved for job reasons, they moved for work or school. Like something has happened that they don't have those strong supports. And it's like finding ways to make that come together again.
Since we're on the topic of male mental health, I thought we talk about the greatest male ever, which is Jesus, and wondering, how do you think Jesus can either help through mental health through his teachings or his actions, or has that influenced the way you've seen mental health and the integration of it with faith?
Yeah, I think I guess first off, we often create like buckets that there's physical health and mental health. And we think of it like, okay, Jesus helped, he healed people's physical health. But, like more and more, we're seeing the connections between we live all together. It's all integrated, right? It's all together. And it's our thoughts, our bodies. We know that on a very basic level, in the sense of, okay, you're really stressed and you start to feel that in your stomach. But that's like happening on so many levels. And in the same way, like our physical bodies affect like our mentality. If you don't sleep well, if you get more emotional, you're more upset. So all that to say, okay, there's going to be stories of like in the Bible, like Jesus cured the woman's anxiety. Jesus cured, there's stories, some people, depending on your interpretation of evil spirits. But what Jesus did do was he met people where they are and he helped ensure that he helped whatever it was that was like holding them back from living that life that was full. And so, in very certain cases, maybe he healed like the lame man or healed a blind man. There's a lot of there's a lot of different ways that Christ just reached out to people. And so how do we see that in our program? Vida Plena isn't an explicitly Christian program. We are open to people of all walks, whether they're believers or not. In our context, that often means people are Catholic. There are a lot of people in Latin America who have evangelical roots, have some exposure to evangelical world mix. And so if that's like important in the person's life, then we'll talk about that and use that as like a framework to how to help grow. And then sometimes we'll see within the group, like different people will have shared faith. And then we'll openly talk about that. We'll really encourage each other that way. I think there's been a lot of harm done in the past where people just say things like, oh, can't you just pray more? And looking at depression, anxiety as a lack of faith. And it's probably, and it's tied to your sin or something like that. Probably the same way that, like, yeah, maybe gluttony leads to many mental health problems. And I'm sorry, gluttony could lead to many physical problems, or like other choices that we make in our lives affect our physical bodies too. We're not caring for ourselves. We're not, those sins will affect our physical body. And it's much more than it's not rather than having this is the world of spiritual, this is the world of physical, this is the world of your mental. It's so much more connected and it really is working with people on that all levels more holistically. So I would never tell somebody to pray out their depression or pray out their anxiety, but that can be like a great source of faith and strength for somebody who is going through a very difficult time. It's, I think the Psalms, for example, speaking to somebody right now, if anybody who's like listening to this is struggling with depression, anxiety, and also considers themselves to be a Christian, or maybe not, I think reading through the Psalms, specifically around Psalms 40, 42, there's so many Psalms where King David is crying out to God and he is just, I am suffering, I am in anguish. It's very clear. He's like, hope, where have you gone, God? Abandon me. It's not like the Psalm of David in depression, but like he's very clear depression. And I think that's a really beautiful model for us to go to God very directly. You don't have to sugarcoat things and tell God very directly. This is what I'm living with. This is what I'm struggling with. And if you don't feel his presence, say that really directly. Like, God, where are you in the middle of this? I need you. And God's big enough to hear that. And I think God does respond to that. And so I would encourage anyone who's going through that sort of like personal struggle to read through those Psalms and make them their own prayer.
I really like the Psalms as a great example. I think that, especially even if you're not Christian, just hearing other people's stories, that's something that's really helped me. So definitely recommend to do something similar if you are going through a very difficult time. I guess I also just wanted to touch on the effectiveness point in the sense that you said that mental health can actually be measured. Just wondering, how can this be done, especially as it's seen as something which is so subjective?
Yeah. So we're not doing anything like at least in our context are like researchers doing interesting projects, brain scans, it's the budget for that. But what we do in our context is we use a variety of validated psychological scales. They're all self report. So it's not like we don't have our team isn't sitting, okay, like you have, and we're not like evaluating the person. It's all based off their own reflections. And then for anyone who's very interested, we use very specifically what's called PHQ-9, Patient Health Questionnaire version. That is a series of questions to be able to screen for depression, like the most common symptoms, which are of hope, a lack of motivation, variations in your sleep, in your diet. And then we also use what's called the GAD-7, the Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7 questionnaire version for anxiety, similar sort of self-rated questions, and a couple other things. But right, so what we do with that is we have people fill that out at when they're signing up for the program every single week of their treatment at the end. And then I can mention following up 3 and 6 months later. And so what that does is that gives us a really clear snapshot to be able to see like what is the trajectory of someone's personalized internal experience of depression, of anxiety. And we don't require for people in our case to have a formal diagnosis. That's not a requirement to join our program. It's really if you feel that you are going through a difficult time and you want help, that's enough. Like in your context, like that's it's because we're not taking like insurance or anything like that. We don't charge anything to the participants to be part of the program. Thank you to many generous donors who make this program possible. Because the people we're working with, sometimes they don't have enough money for bus. Like they can't pay public bus even to come to the groups. We're really working on people who are quite economically marginalized. And so it's really enough, especially in our context, if someone is like willing to jump the stigmas, they're going to raise their hand and say, I need help, they need help. Yeah. So we are able to, so what we're doing is we're able to like a whole panorama snapshot of how has their depression been affecting them across these weeks and what is the outcomes. And like I mentioned, so specifically, we see 74% improvements in depression. And then if you combine depression and anxiety, 84% of people see some sort of significant change. We also see improvements in like more qualitatively in people's like relationships, in their ability to work, in their access to work. And even more recently, we've been really looking at sleep and the connection between someone's depression, health, anxiety, and sleep quality. And we know researchers know it's been proven in the literature that there's a very direct relationship. We all know that if you're laying awake, anxious at night, spending, you're not sleeping well, and you're don't during the day, you're much more irritable, you're snapping at your kids, you're not able to function at work the same. And so we've been now starting to track like how does our program and going through our program improve sleep? And we're really actually quite excited to see this is like very literally yesterday, we were just talking about this with the team and like finally done the analysis. And so something over half to eight, depending on the group or the space, but between half to three-quarters of people join our program have problems with sleep on the outset. And then leaving the program, only 20% of people report having sleep problems. And so that's just like a big public health win as well. We're all becoming much more aware of like how important sleep is. And if we can get that from down from 50 to 75% of people down to 20% of people, that feels like a huge win. So this is a long roundabout way of saying, yes, you can track these things. And that's really important for me. It is one of the pillars of our program based. Like I meant, it goes back to the foundation of why Vida Plena started. It's, it wasn't, I just didn't want, just felt so unfair. There's so many programs out there that are having poor people do jump through all these hoops and getting to get one small benefit. And it just feels, I don't know, I don't want to waste people's time. And we're talking about people's like mental health. If you're struggling with depression, I don't want to give you false promises. I
Mhm.
like want to be certain to know that this works. This is going to actually help somebody. This is actually going to help make a difference in their life. And I want to be able to know that with certainty. And then on a selfish level, I'm like dedicating my life to this, like working all the hours and all the things. And like, I don't want to be wasting my time either. If I didn't believe this
Yeah.
worked, like on a very personal, selfish level, if I wasn't convinced this would work, I'd rather just, I'll take an easy job somewhere else
Mhm.
and just kind of go through the motions and not have to go so much. So yeah, it's knowing that the program works and then people's lives change is so important.
Yeah. I really love that. I love the quantitative elements of it as well. I find that really interesting. And similar to you, I really like looking at the evidence and seeing the actual impact, how it changed and things like that. Just going on to some of the more qualitative elements of Vida Plena, what would you say are some of the common problems or difficulties that participants face when they approach the organization?
Yeah. And like you alluded to earlier, there's stigma for men. So the majority of us people in our program are women, about 85% women right now. We are interested in creating like a men's program. If you're somebody out there who has experience in that or wants to help fund and make that possible, we have been talking about that as a team for quite a while. There's a real need to help men, specifically young men. But so what does that look like? So our average person in our group is a woman probably between 25 to 55, 45 off of their moms. And what they're coming to us with is a variety of just normal life problems, really, but that have affected them and then are affecting like their daily life. And so there's a lot of like problems like between partners, between in romantic relationships, marriages, conflict with kids, people who are struggling with chronic illnesses and how to adjust their life around that, people who have they're feeling like lonely and cut off, like we mentioned earlier. People who have a significant loss of a loved one, kind of dealing with the grief issues around that. And the people who are dealing with like financial worries and like a lot of like economic stress, and it all compounds. And so, like, with that, I don't pretend that going to therapy or it's going to be like this magic bullet for some of the broader context, life circumstances, things that people are dealing with. But also, so like in like a case that would maybe like untypical for us would be like someone like a woman who's like maybe a refugee. She's come from Venezuela, so she's left her family behind. She's struggling to find work. She maybe came with her partner and her kids, but there's a lot of conflict because of all the financial tensions that are happening. And so like nobody. So sometimes there's could be this comment of just give people jobs when that fix everything. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, in the realities of where we're working, it's like you have to work on both sides. And no one's going to show up at your door if you're depressed and unable to get out of bed and unable to advocate for yourself. No one's going to show up at your door and just hand you a job. You have to be able to put yourself out there, go to interviews, really pound the pavement. Or actually, in our context, often people have to do or doing entrepreneurship things, isn't just as a way to survive. And so you have to have that internal strength to be able to go out and do that every day. And because people are just going to hand you that opportunity, unfortunately. And so that's what we're trying to work with is like people to make sure that they have that internal strength to be able to face the challenges that are real in their lives. And we're not able to fix all of the challenges, but we're working to help so that people have the internal strength and resources and then work community of people around them to be able to overcome those challenges. And so that is setting like the panorama of the types of things we see and like how we try to work. We also try very hard to partner with other programs, and that's what we found is actually the most exciting kind of way is when we partner with other programs who are offering some of those other services. And so we d- work we work with an organization who's doing entrepreneurship training. So for vulnerable women, helping them to start a business, start something to be able to support themselves economically. But what they've seen is like the women, they have an optional, it's optional. It's always optional for us. We never mandate anyone. They can like optionally join one of our groups. They've seen that the women who option to join our groups do much better in the program because like they're dealing with this stuff at home, like whatever's going on, like the conflicts that they're having with their family and those tensions. They're able to be more than fully present in business classes and fully able to commit to their entrepreneurship thing, and it's less likely to fail because like they're dealing with okay all of the other background noise much more holistic way. And so those types of partnerships are always like the most exciting for us because we see like the best results. It's like when you're dealing with the other components and you can add on mental health, it just supercharges what other development thing that you're interested in. And yeah, that's like how we work and how we try to think about it.
Yeah, okay. And kind of moving on to some of the outcomes of the stories. I know you mentioned one earlier, but do you have any other stories of people whose lives have been completely transformed by some of the work that you do?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, so I'm the director and the organization. So most of the time I'm not doing the therapy myself, but I did get certified and did go through the whole process. So I will occasionally run a group to keep my feet on the ground and kind of stay connected. And I had this one woman in my group, and people who are thinking about suicide is very common for us. Like that is something we deal with, and we have a whole set of protocols. spoke through. But beyond that, it's like very much, yeah, there's a lot of people who come to us thinking about suicide. And so there's this one woman in my group specifically, and she was this case. She had come from Venezuela. She was struggling with financial problems. She had found her husband was being unfaithful. She was struggling with a cancer diagnosis. A lot of things were going on in her life, and she was I worked with her and negotiated with her to she was thinking about taking pills to end her life. She was just at that rope. And so we worked it through, talked to her. She gave the pills to her husband for safekeeping. And we, over the course of weeks, with the group, like it was really beautiful how the group came around her and supported her and just like really just showed her like so much love through all that she was going through. And there was like two particular breakthrough moments. One was her daughter was in high school, or I was in high school. There was like a special parent day event, and she was just struggling with depression, didn't want to go, but reached out for and people in the group, we encouraged her, like, this is gonna be important for your daughter, please go. Turned out her daughter had prepared part of the special parent day event, like this letter she wanted to read to her mom about how much she admired her mom, what that meant to her, and she brought the letter in like the next group meeting and just read it to us in tears, just talking about, wow, I didn't realize my daughter like saw me this way. And despite my struggles, how important I am to her and how important that is. And then we do like a closing ceremony at the end of the group, but we invite the family members to come, gave out certificates. And her daughter did like, she came up to me and all she said was like, thank you for helping my mom. And having known the backstory, it was really meaningful to be able to see how, or just even the daughter had been able to see that transformation in her life. And going back to the piece of faith there, one of the incredible things that this woman, she is a Christian. She said her husband, because of all of their struggles, had fallen away. She talked about how she started to see like this transformation even in her husband and like being interested in, okay, let's say prayers before meals and like talking about going back to church and she was like, I think the reason she told me recently, I think the reason that we're going through all of these struggles is because God is trying to call us back to Him. And I was extremely touched because her life is, if there's anybody I've met in real world who's like the story of Job, of just one thing after another, for her to say that and come to that conclusion herself that I think God is trying to call us back to Him. It was remarkable. Not something that I would ever say to herself. That's completely her own personal interpretation and conclusion. But that's what she feels. That's what she feels God is like doing in their lives. And for her to come through that place where she's thinking about ending her life very competitively thinking about that, to be like, no, I see, despite her life, it's still very difficult. But the fact that she now sees like there's this light, God truth shining through that, and I think those are like the types of transformations that God's doing and God's working. I really feel that this is God working in our program and not that we're perfect or we're doing this perfectly by any means, but God uses very imperfect vessels and he is working.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you shared that. And that's, yeah, a really incredible transformation and story. So thank you for that. I also just wanted to kind of ask, I don't know if it's okay for some more personal questions, because
Yeah.
I feel like if you're, yeah, working in mental health a lot, I was just wondering, how has that like affected your personal mental health and just that, yeah, really.
So I think caretaker burnout is very real. That is common, unfortunately, in this field. And making sure that the people on the front line are supported is really important to us. So I'll talk to myself in a second, but like for the team, we do weekly supervision where they go over their cases with a clinical supervisor who is a psychologist. We have a separate psychologist who can work with them. And so really taking care of the team is very important because they're at the front lines. They're hearing these stories day in and day out. And it can start to very much affect your lives and being able to like cut off and turn off and at the end of the day and be present with your family can be very challenging. So we like look out for that for a lot for our team. Myself, so like I mentioned, so I'm as the director, CEO, I'm not working as day in and day out. There's occasions where I run a group, but it's more, I think my personal journey is much more about that of the founder and like founder scenario and founder burnout There are specific cases though that I'll be like in contact with. They're quite hard stories to hear. I think it is like doing the classic thing. So, okay, so when I started a mental health program, I knew, okay, it was very important for me to get mental health, maintaining strong friendships and social connections, especially your family, making sure you're exercising. And so I was like determined to do all those things. I was like, okay, a lot of friends, yeah, make sure I keep those connections really strong, my family, okay, get exercising, start this thing. And so then I was like, okay, I guess like we're going to cut corners is on my sleep. And and you could do that for a while. You can't do that long term. And it just started to really build up. I would just have these just emotional breakdowns. Like, okay, what's like wrong with me? It's like over tiny nothing. And I was like, oh no, I'm just overtired. And people, what's wrong? And they're like, I'm fine. They're like, why are you breaking out over this little thing? And it was like one of those pieces of understanding, like, okay, what it is like, I need to be taking care of my sleep and working, making sure that is a priority. And so that has been like a little bit of my personal journey because I wake up and worry and answer the emails. And so making sure that was a priority is really important to me. And I had to learn it the hard way.
Mm. Yeah, it can be a difficult one to deal with and to cope with.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that surprised you about yourself whilst being founder of Vida Plena?
I think it's really fun to have an idea and have an idea in your head and then an idea on a digital PowerPoint and then see it happening in the world. And that sense that like it is possible to make things happen in the world. And there's kind of like this term out there being like agenic person who's like have a vision for what you want to see happen and then like making that real is really exciting. And it's very, yeah, it's just really exciting. Be like, oh, I like wanted this thing to happen. And it's now there's like people, a team, people are doing it, and then seeing it work, of course, like at the end of the day is that's the most important piece. But yeah, that's been a really, I'm sure it must be similar for you. Like you had this idea for this podcast and how you're going to reach out
Yeah.
to people and now you're doing it. You didn't just stop. I think so often we have an idea, but then it feels like too scary, too big, too overwhelming. We're not sure. And so it just stays there. And so taking that step and it's one step builds off the next step, off the next step. And I think you don't have to do the big thing all at once, but you start with that first
Hmm.
step. And I'm sure very similar must be your journey must be similar. Okay, I'm going to do this. And then you figure out like, how do you record and how do you invite people? And now you're doing it. And now this is like something you're doing. And so I think that has been a really exciting kind of experience and just life experience of seeing that you can make things happen out in the world and not just let the world pop into you. That kind of like shift has really been a lot.
Yeah, I like sense of agency. You alluded to it a bit earlier, but that's definitely been something which I love about podcasting, and I'm sure you love about your role too. Do you think that your faith has changed in any way throughout your journey? Could be in life or starting Be the Planner.
I think it's seeing God's faithfulness step by step and having even more examples that I can pull from of like God being faithful and God opening the doors and closing the doors at the right time. There's a lot of that too. Maybe a lot of people would identify with this, but I feel like I was going through along for years of what is my calling and what is my mission and I had jobs that they were good, they were making fulfilling and they're doing good work. And lots of people would be like, that's fine, Joy. Why? But I don't know. I just felt like I wasn't like in my space. And I just remember for years and years being like, I don't know, God, what am I supposed to be doing? And it wasn't like one day God was like, oh, here's the Facebook post that's going to tell you what to do with your life. But it was like nudges, there's these nudges. And now I can look back and I can see that all of those different things that at the time felt like just, I don't know, I'm just like jumping from this thing. And then I guess I'll do this other thing. And then I'll take this other job here. I couldn't see like a common thread, but God was making a common thread. There was definitely God training me, giving me life experiences, opening the right pathways, putting the right people in my life where then, like people to support, encourage, set examples. So God was like working through that all the whole way in ways that I couldn't see or appreciate. And I think it feels more tangible now. There's a more clear sense. Okay, like in that like fuzziness, there was a lot of your just like fuzzy haziness of okay, I'm just kind of like groping about, like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. God was like working in the background. And that feels like much clearer now. And so then also as you're doing your own thing too, there's a lot of times it still continues to be like uncertain, still continue to be like uncertain of what's the right path and how to go about things. And it's more just like continuing to trust, okay, God took us this far. And so if he'll continue to take us forward until it's done. And then it's okay. I always try to think of it. This is God's project. This is not mine. I really like the analogy of being a gardener in the sense that like I have to do the work. Like I have to pull the weeds and put in the fertilizer and plant the seeds, but I can't make the seeds sprout.
Yeah.
I can't make the sunshine. Like that is all God. And so I just do my part. And so this project that Vida Plena is God's. And so it'll go as far as he wants. Is if it one day it's okay, this is as far as it goes and it ends here, then like I'll be crushed. But that's ultimately God's decision. And so it's trusting him through that.
Yeah, I like that, especially what you alluded to in terms of the growing analogy. I think Paul says something about that in like First Corinthians as well. About yeah, we
Mhm.
can plant and someone else water, but it's God that makes it grow. And
Yes.
I guess from that point, I just wanted to ask: is there a certain Bible quote which you really like, what's personally helped you throughout your career journey or life in general?
There's two. A millennial me has them like tattooed on me. One is whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And that's in
Yeah,
reference to when Jesus is talking about when I was sick, you cared for me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me a cup of water. The people said to him, like, when did we do that? And his response is, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And that's just a reminder to see the deep humanity in everyone and deep humanity in people that often society in the world has tossed away as not being valuable and not having anything to contribute. There's like this deep humanity that Christ wants is in every single one of those people, that those are like, you are serving Christ in that. And then the second one is from Matthew, and it's love one another as I have loved you. And that's like a double challenge. It's two that has like two parts. The first is like this challenge of what's the standard of love. We often talk about, okay, you got to draw lines. Like, this is the boundaries. This is how far. But what is the love one another as I have loved you? And how much of God love us? He gave his life for us. And, but then also the flip side is that reminder of like, how much am I loved? I am loved that much. And so that is
see,
how I can love everyone else. It's not from my own strength that I'm able to love that much. It's because I have first been loved. And so those two passages are really like the guiding force for my life.
that's incredible. I really like both of those as well. I think I was speaking to JD about, I asked the exact same question. He said, same thing as Matthew 20 by 40 as well. So it's nice to see that
Yes.
synergy. And just sort of going on to the end part of the podcast, if you had sort of one piece of advice for someone who's maybe struggling with mental health, depression, what would it be? I know it's quite a difficult question. Just interested to hear your thoughts.
The broad thing is that it will get better. It can get better. I think when you're in the moment, it feels that you're going to be like this forever and that it's like never going to get better. You're just going to live in this place of pain and hurting and despair forever. And it will get better. It can get better. And there are distinct things that we can do that will help, can improve it. And holding on to that sense of like hope. I think that is the most important piece that I'd want to convey to somebody.
Thank you for sharing that. And just to talk about Vida Plena more specifically, what are some things that the audience could do to help out the organization?
Sure. So just if anyone wants to read more about us, our website is www.vidaplena, and Vida is spelled V as in Victor, VIDAPLENA dot global. So vidaplena.global. And specifically things that would be helpful for us are, of course, like spreading the word, helping just kind of like more out there. We're kind of like a small organization working in this corner of the world. And so just helping more people be aware of it. Of course, like if you're excited about like supporting us financially, we're able to help somebody for the full course of treatment right now for $120. And that would give somebody the full 9 sessions plus follow up, any kind of like additional services that are needed. So that's like a very concrete way of being able to provide that financial support. And then we do work with volunteers. If you have experience like doing things like social media or content or writing, very much more specifically, if you're in academia doing research, we'd love to partner with you there. And so those are like lots of spaces that we help. If you are, like I mentioned, people who are able to provide kind of follow-up care. So it all have to be all in Spanish, but those people have background in providing mental health care. We want to help with some of these special cases pro bono, that would be amazing as well. So yeah, blindly just places. Definitely would love to hear from anyone. My email is joy@vidaplena.global.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this podcast and sharing your story, but as well as Vida Plena. I've really enjoyed it.
Huge thank you as well. And congratulations on your new journey in this whole path. And
Yeah.
really excited to see where God's going to take it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.